praised by the others. As Sufis call to live their lives not according to their wills, but in response to divine revelation and inspiration. They regard any sense of personal accomplishment as inimical to their vocation. As divine inspiration often requires Sufis to adopt beliefs and practices which will conflict what dominant social culture considers fitting and proper, they also look upon the desire for praise as an obstacle to overcome. So in an effort to conquer, get rid of arrogance, wipe out and eliminate arrogance from the heart and minds, Sufis develop a practice called in the Arabic malama or tazkiyah. Reapproach, censor, blame, but to me the best English translation for the word tazkiyah is purifying yourself. There is no original sin in Islam. In the creation, God gives full glass of water to everybody. The nature is not problematic for Islam and for Sufism, but the nurture is problematic. Sufis believe that God is not far away, where through many disciplines and fasting and worship, you will have to make a journey to God. That's not what Sufis is all about. But Sufis believe that many things, God is so near, God is so close. As it says in the Quran, Quran says to Prophet Muhammad, when they ask about me to you, when they ask about the God, tell them, I am closer to them, closer than their own jugular veins. So God is not a far reality. God is very close. But there is something in us, one of the main things is arrogance and pride and superiority complex, that our own mental and spiritual blocks disables us to feel the closeness of and the presence of God in our life. So the journey is not too far, but working with yourself, eliminating those mental and spiritual blocks and the block arteries from your heart so you can experience God. So Sufis, they develop many rich practices to get rid of this arrogance and this superiority complex, racism, hate from their hearts, and through the process of tazkiyah, which I may say more in the Q&A session. And again, this central concept of Sufism, tazkiyah, purifying yourself, constantly working inwards, constantly working your decoding mechanisms, constantly working with your antennas, constantly working with your receiving mechanisms, so that you will be open to the existing reality of the closeness of God Almighty, is deeply rooted in Islam in many different verses. I will give only one example from Surah 5 and the verse 54. God says, O believers, whoever among you renounce Islam, let do so. Soon God will replace them with others whom God will love, and they will love God. Who will be humble towards the believers? These people will be humble towards the believers, mighty against unbelievers, striving hard in the way of God, and will have no fear of reproach or criticism or blame of others. Not only different doctrines and other concepts of Sufism, let me give few examples from the Sufi practices. How these practices also deeply rooted and suggested and informed, if not shaped, by certain verses from the Quran. The first one, and I think one of the most important one, is the Sufi practice of Zuhd, Z-U-H-D, could be translated asceticism, which temporarily Sufism or the mystical voice within Islam invites people. This concept of asceticism also very well grounded in the holy text of Islam. The Holy Quran calls upon mankind to turn away from things passive and provisional and ask them to be concerned within things which are eternal and permanent. This Sufi or Muslim invitation, Muslim mystical invitation to asceticism is never understood literally. And it is always emphasized to be temporarily. A permanent ascension, permanent asceticism from the community, as some other type of mystical practices exist, leaving humankind, leaving the society, constantly being in a monastic life or celibate life life is condemned in Islam. You, in a period of time where you are going through the formational period of your spiritual life, yes, you have to be ascetic. You have to draw yourself from the society until you develop those spiritual muscles. But you have to return. You have to return to the community. All the tekkas or zaviyas or darskhanas, all the Sufi monasteries, all the attendees of these monasteries were people who in their daytime working in different professions, from being scholars to being butchers to street cleaners. But in the nighttime, they turn into saints. They turn into skillful, sophisticated Sufi practitioners. Quran and Sufism basically invites people, yes, you will get involved with life. Otherwise, you will never see and glorify God's name in such a rich way. But you will not attach yourself. You will not attach your heart to these worldly things. A great Muslim scholar and a Sufi practitioner, Imam Hanafi, who is the eponym and the founder of one of the four schools of thought in Sunni tradition, he was a very rich man. He was a tycoon. He had maybe $1 million, if not $1 billion trade, while he himself was a jurist, but at the same time Sufi practitioner. And one of the followers of him basically respectfully expressed his anxiety and shock. He said, I have only 2 camels, but when I pray, I'm constantly thinking about them. When I sleep, I'm constantly worried about them. I hardly have a peace in mind and heart. You have hundreds of camels and so much business going on. How on earth you get the required attention and motivation and the focus of God? He says, I tie my camels into the barn. I don't tie them into my heart. So I get involved because in every aspect of life, including trade and commerce, I glorify God's name. I look for God's fingerprints. To me, I don't attach myself. I deal with these things as a stepping stone to reach God. But I don't keep this as an ultimate goal in my life. This kind of asceticism is deeply rooted. This kind of not attaching your heart to anything, anyone, but God alone is deeply rooted again in the Quran. In the 31st surah, the verse 33, God says, let not this life of this world deceive you. Or in the surah 29, verse 64, God says, the life of this world is nothing but pastime and play. It is this life of the hereafter that is the true life, if they but knew it. In the following verse, the life of man is tempted by love and desire for wealth, children, and the hoarding of treasures of gold and silver, branded horses, wealth of cattle and plantations. Who is not? These are the comforts of transitory life of this world. The everlasting best comfort, however, is with God. The everlasting best comfort, however, is with God only. In another verse, Quran says, you should know that the life of this world is only play and amusement, a show and boasting among yourselves, a quest for greater riches and more children. It is the similitude is that the vegetation and the flourish after rain, the growth of which delights the tillers, then it winters and you see the turn to yellow, soon it becomes dry and crumbles away. But the things that you should yearn, things that you should look for, you should strive for, is in the hereafter, and they will never die away. Sufis, another important Sufi practice is the dhikr. How many people here attended a dhikr session? The remembrance of God, zikr. Mostly it's done in the form of a circle, where repeatedly in a prayerful way, Sufis remember either some names of God or some verses from the Quran, and sometimes with body movements. Dhikr, the remembrance of God, is the second of these main Sufi practices after asceticism, zuhd. This practice also based in part on the recurring Quranic injunction, where Quran says, اللَّهُ كَثِيرًا. Remember God often. Remember God frequently. Or أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. Verily, certainly, only in the remembrance of God that hearts find rest and peace. Dhikr usually